Okay, welcome again, everyone. I hope everyone's settled in and ready to go. I see people still logging in, and that's fine. I will take a couple of minutes here just to go over a couple of housekeeping items for this webinar as we're still settling in here. So first off, we do welcome your questions. As we're going along in this webinar, feel free to ask any questions using the Q&A button at the bottom of your call. We will have a Q&A session towards the end of the event, and we will take care of those questions then. Also, just a reminder, this webinar is being recorded. We will have availability for this session. I have a recording of this session on full video on our website, nationalhousingtrust.org, and we'll send you a notification once that is ready for you to view, should you want to revisit the webinar. With that, those are all the housekeeping items. And with that, I will introduce our facilitator, Todd Nedwick, here from NHT. Take it away,
Great.
Todd.
Great. You can hear me okay? Thanks, Kelvin. Good afternoon or good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining today's session. My name is Todd Nedwick. I'm the Senior Director of Sustainability Policy at the National Housing Trust, and I will be guiding our conversation today. Today, we're going to delve into how we can equip affordable housing providers with the tools and resources they need to create climate-friendly and healthy homes that benefit residents and their communities. I'm thrilled to have four incredible leaders with us today. They're experts working at the intersection of housing affordability and climate, and they'll share their insights on the challenges and opportunities in reducing carbon emissions from our existing affordable housing stock. But before we meet them, I want to set the stage for our discussion. So first of all, this webinar is the second installment in NHT's Insights on Housing series. Through these webinars from across the housing spectrum to explore solutions to some of the industry's toughest challenges. Our first webinar was held on May 16th, focused on preserving affordable housing amid some of the tough headwinds. If you missed it, you can catch a replay on our website. Across the country, housing providers are dealing with rising operating expenses, increased insurance costs, and a backlog of maintenance needs that started during the pandemic. And renters are still struggling to pay rent due to the pandemic's lasting economic impacts, which limits resources to invest in properties and resident services. This context is crucial for today's discussion. Affordable housing providers are juggling urgent priorities, and sustainability might not always be at the forefront. They might lack the time and staff resources to learn about decarbonizing their properties or even know where to start. And while the Inflation Reduction Act offers great opportunities for sustainable, affordable housing, navigating its programs can be complex. At NHT, sustainability is a core part of our mission. It's woven into our strategic plan and all our work, whether that's policy innovation, real estate development, lending, resident services, and energy solutions. And really, to achieve the goal of enabling all people to enjoy the health, economic, and environmental benefits of resilient and sustainable homes. In line with this commitment, we've partnered with various organizations to support peer affordable housing providers through a series of Inflation Reduction Act boot camps. These boot camps have helped providers understand the benefits of sustainability, how to start assessing opportunities to improve the performance of their buildings, and the range of IRA resources available to them. Recordings of these bootcamp sessions and other IRA resources are available on our website. You can see the link here. And we publish a monthly newsletter with timely updates on Inflation Reduction Act programs relevant to affordable housing. And you can sign up for our newsletter using the QR code you see here. 2 years ago, with support from JPMorgan Chase, NHT and our partners launched an initiative in DC aimed at helping affordable housing providers make their buildings greener and healthier. Given that DC has one of the highest rates of childhood asthma in the country, this project focuses on multifamily buildings where children suffer from chronic asthma. By eliminating fossil fuel use in homes and removing other indoor air contaminants, we aim to reduce asthma triggers and their other respiratory issues. So through this program, NHT is offering building owners technical assistance to develop plans for decarbonization and healthy housing, as well as support in securing financial resources for these upgrades. And today, we were very thrilled to learn that we've been selected for an EPA Community Change Grant to further support this project. I just want to take a second. We are incredibly grateful to JP Chase for backing the launch of this initiative, to the DC Department of Energy and Environment for their collaboration, and of course the EPA for recognizing our project's value and importance. Supporting housing providers through projects like those I just discussed is one of the many solutions to scale up healthier, climate-friendly, affordable housing. I'm excited to hear from our panelists about the challenges and solutions they see in the field from their diverse perspectives. So I'm joined today by Krista Egger, Vice President, Building Resilient Futures at Enterprise Green Communities, David Epley, Associate Director at the DC Department of Energy and Environment, AJ Patton, CEO and Managing Partner at 548 Enterprise, and Abigail Suarez, Executive Director, Head of Neighborhood Development at JP Chase. And as I said, I'm excited to learn from our panelists today, so let's jump in. Thank you all for joining.
Thank you, Todd, and congratulations.
Thank you.
Congrats.
We're very excited. So I kind of want to start this conversation by talking about the why. Why is it important to prioritize sustainability and affordable housing? What are the benefits? And why has each of your organizations made such strong commitments to this issue? AJ, can we start with you? I'm curious how, I know that sustainability is pretty core to the work that you do. Can you talk a little bit about your mission and how sustainability achieves your goals?
Yeah, absolutely. So, to us, it's about quality of life and access to these sustainable technologies. Personally, in 1999, our gas got shut off in my home. My mother was a single mother. We had a $400 gas bill. And so for a year, we had to boil water to take a bath. That sticks with you. And through my travels, I've learned that that is a common experience in low-income communities around the country. And so we started our firm to build sustainable technologies, not just because we're in love with necessarily the technologies, but we feel like this is what's the access to those technologies can truly change the quality of life for folks, and that this is not a luxury item. Clean air, clean water, clean energy is not a luxury item. That is it's an access thing. And so we created the 548 platform with the sole focus of serving as the bridge to reimagine those technologies as necessities for quality of life for all communities.
Great, thank you. Thanks for sharing that.
Mm-hmm.
Krista, can I turn to you next? Enterprise has really been at the forefront of sustainability and affordable housing through Enterprise Green Communities and other initiatives. From your vantage point, what are some of the benefits of sustainability to owners and residents?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Todd, and congrats on y'all's award. Very excited to see that move forward. But I think our experience at Enterprise has shown that we can build housing affordably and sustainably, like together at the same time. Like we have more than 200,000 homes around the country with Green Community certification, and communities large and small that prove that case. And while there are implementation challenges unique to regions across the country that I think we'll talk about later, I think it's really essential to build homes for people with low and moderate incomes that meet certain standards of quality. And that's what I ultimately think sustainability does. It brings a certain level of quality. Ultimately, I think the benefit of a sustainable home is a stable, affordable home. At Enterprise, we've defined green building or sustainable housing as housing that's healthy, efficient, and resilient. Like those are the three main pillars. And while over the years, what we've been able to achieve in those three categories has changed, like we know so much more now about how building materials can affect health and climate than when we launched our program 20 years ago. But those characteristics, healthy, efficient, resilient, like still ring true today as responding to needs that we all have from the buildings we call home. And I think they ring true as to what we as housers, like in the affordable housing community, can expect from the homes that we create. So we're talking about long-term affordability through reliable operating expenses. We're talking about a healthier environment for people who live and work in properties, especially important for those people who are more at risk of chronic disease. And sustainable housing hedges against future risk, a home that's affordable to keep warm in the winter and cool in the summer, like this summer we're having in DC this year, and a home that's reasonably able to retain power through short outages of the grid, in spite of how our temperatures fluctuate. I think all in all, sustainable housing is high quality, stable, affordable housing.
Great. Thanks, Krista. Dave, DC has some of the most ambitious climate policies or goals in the country, and is at the forefront of implementing some ambitious climate policy tools. I'm curious, why is it so important to focus on carbon emissions from buildings in DC? And maybe you could talk a little bit about some of the work you're doing with affordable housing through your agency.
Thanks, Todd. I hope we have goals and policies, because having goals is like New Year's resolutions, and policies, we all know what happens with those. They've kind of fall off the cliff. But yeah, so DC, okay, 75% of greenhouse gas emissions roughly come from our building sector, with the transportation sector making up the other quarter. As the folks have just said, we know that physical and mental well-being is so deeply influenced by the buildings that we spend most of our time in. We're also, these ideas of opportunities for local workforce, and jobs opportunities, everything like from entry-level jobs in the single-family renovations type space into, large developments and everything in between. The building industry offers a lot in that space. We also know in DC it's hotter. Sometimes it's really a lot drier, and sometimes a lot wetter, which has been dry and hot here, except for recently. And so having that and having a place of safety and shelter for residents. And we just know that by doing things, we can improve quality of life, and then also simultaneously address the climate crisis on like a grander scale outside of just the district itself. So buildings are like the focal point, it's the commonality, and shared solutions come from that for us. And so through that, we have like our building energy performance standards. We have, I don't want to like overlook the new construction world of codes, and there's so many meaningful things happening there. And even though it's less complicated theoretically, it is still quite complicated. So, and to your second part of the question about some of the things that we're doing, and I'll talk more about this later, but we had this really wonderful opportunity a couple of years ago with the ARPA funds, American Rescue Plan Act funds, to stand up what we call our Affordable Housing Retrofit Accelerator. And we also have but that's for multifamily retrofits with a bend towards electrification and also towards compliance with our BEPS program. So we can talk more about it later, but that was a big opportunity for us. And we're thinking of that as kind of phase one. Now we're moving into the phase two, which is really with the Inflation Reduction Act dollars and weaving in local funds. And so that's been one of the big opportunities that we've had in the last couple of years. And we also have a single family version of that, our affordable home electrification program. So we're really trying to pool resources and dollars, as well as just thinking through the regulations and other sort of like resistance and friction within the system of getting folks to be able to successfully build housing that is, I'll borrow from Krista, healthy, efficient, and resilient. So I'll stop there, but
Yeah, great.
More to come.
Lots of exciting stuff happening in DC.
Yeah.
Abby, JPMorgan Chase has provided grant funding to increase the supply of climate resilient, affordable housing as part of the firm's commitment to improving housing affordability and stability for households of color. Can you talk about how sustainability supports these priorities?
Sure. Thank you. So yes, just for a brief introduction, Abby Suarez, head of neighborhood development. My team is responsible for the implementation of that 400 million commitment to neighborhood development, which includes low-cost loans, equity grants. We also love to use our voice and our insights to improve housing affordability and homeownership growth and wealth building. And really, you sort of noted to that, we came to this work as part of our housing supply work. I don't need to tell anybody in this virtual room that supply is not meeting demand. And we've been tracking that imbalance for a long time. And as a firm, we have the ability to do national work, but we also do local work when we go deep in markets. And through our partnership with our program officer in Miami, we had really realized that if we were serious about tackling the housing affordability and supply challenges in the US, we really needed to think about sustainability and the climate resiliency of our housing stock. And so through that, we sort of incubated that strategy through our work in Miami. And then in 2020, we announced 50 million in grants to organizations working to increase the supply of climate resilient and affordable housing in the US, as you mentioned. We were so excited that we supported your work, NHT's work, to promote the decarbonization efforts in Washington, D.C., and really see this work as crucial, kind of like what all the other panels have said, of how to keep housing and households stable, healthy, and how do we think about reducing the cost burden, which I know we probably can get into that. The other thing I wanted to quickly plug is that we have the ability to use our insights and data. And so last week, the JP Morgan Chase Institute produced a report called Feeling the Heat, How Households Manage High Air Conditioning Bills. And it was basically the Institute's report found that low-income households mostly maintain their usual spending instead of cooling their houses significantly less than high-income households do. And so, again, this sort of brings, and I encourage everybody to read that report, but brings into highlight the choices that a lot of households have to make between cooling or heating, and how they manage their spending. So we're looking at it not only from the funding perspective, but also from like what insights and data we can provide to the industry.
Thank you. Yeah, and that report sounds really interesting. If you have a chance to put a link to it in the chat, I think that would be great. So thank you all. I want to move on to talk about sort of what some of the challenges might be. As I mentioned in my beginning remarks, affordable housing providers are facing some tough headwinds. And despite all those benefits that we just discussed, it may be difficult for housing providers to make sustainability investments, such as decarbonization, a priority in their portfolio. And especially for the case with existing buildings, because we know that they can be more challenging than new construction. So I want to sort of dive into what are some of the challenges to investing in sustainability and existing affordable housing that you all have come across. Dave, if I could start with you and ask what challenges that as DOEE been encountering as you've been rolling out these programs for affordable housing.
Thanks, Todd. And yeah, I'll definitely underscore that retrofitting existing buildings tends to be a lot more challenging. You never know what you're going to get necessarily. And in those buildings, everything from the complications introduced to the financing and cash on hand and what's available resource-wise financially to the technology challenges that you might find within a building. So when we were putting together our affordable, our accelerator program, one of the first things we did is kind of looked at the different types of housing that we were working to address. So because of the building energy performance standards, all affordable housing of a certain square footage and greater, I'm going to say simply 50,000 square feet or greater needed to comply. So there are about 140 buildings, and those were comprised of our public housing, as well as covenanted affordable housing, and then our sort of naturally occurring affordable housing. And so we realized pretty quickly just like the different challenges presented in those different scenarios. And then layered on top of that were, this sort of the financing structure of those properties and sort of what was available to them. And oftentimes we found that many of them were sort of in this midstream moment, and they were not able to take on additional debt. They didn't really have cash on hand. And so that really influenced the way that we designed and built this program to be able to bring resources that were available to folks in that moment. And then we also recognize that, and this is reflected in our regulations, that oftentimes it was better for everyone if that building owner could wait until the next building energy performance or BEPS cycle or down the road when they're refinancing to be able to take on or do the work. So it's just much easier to stack in additional funding within that refi than it would be midstream. So So those sort of an influence. So we've taken from like a regulatory perspective and like how the financing is structured and set up. I'll note that in the BEPS program, we call it like our extended deep energy retrofit pathway. And of the 60 buildings that are currently participating in our accelerator program, about over a dozen or about a dozen have elected to do that. So this is something that's being used, that's been helped. I'd be remiss not to mention that Todd and many folks really have been very helpful in this space, informing us about things that we do not know with our kind of affordable housing task force for BEPS. So I'll try to make this quick. There's so many things I could take up the whole time here, but I won't. Outreach can be really challenging, particularly at scale, just broadly getting people's attention, particularly in NOAA buildings, and trying to find the right person and like kind of the shell game of like who is actually in charge here. That's really challenging to do and get people's attention, even when there's regulations and theoretical fines associated with not complying. That can be quite challenging. I mentioned, well, one thing is maintaining affordability after investment is a big thing. And like most time building owners do not want to take upon themselves an additional covenant or extension of that or a new covenant. So that's been a challenge. We've had building owners turn down significant amounts of money because they just don't want to go down that path. And then even if they did take it on, the enforcement of that from our perspective is also quite of a new territory for us. Our agency in particular, like we have this challenge of like multi-fiscal year kind of fiscal year cycles, and trying to bridge across those fiscal years can be quite challenging in a budget sense because we're looking for deep energy retrofits, but those oftentimes because of equipment availability, the season when you might want to do the work, let's say like in the shoulder seasons, fall and spring, it just presents these moments where it's hard to kind of pull those to invest in those and knowing that they're going to cross fiscal years. So that's one of our limitations as an agency. Technology challenges, I'll talk about that more later, but just like, you know, when you're talking about major like electrification, deep energy retrofits, there's this potential displacement of a resident. And then finally, I'll just mention like the scale of investment that needs to happen in this is quite large. And even though we have a lot of resources, there's still more that need to be there. So I think we're moving in the right direction, but there's more to come and more that needs to happen over an extended period of time. So thanks, Todd.
Thank you. AJ, you're working on the ground as a developer and also helping other developers to achieve their sustainability goals. I'm curious, what challenges have you encountered? Any similar to what David mentioned, or?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll build a little bit on what David said. I think two things kind of stick out for me. One is construction data. You know, I think, you know, I'm a for-profit developer that builds affordable housing, market rate, industrial, and, you know, but everything has a sustainable and inclusive lens through it. And, you know, my contemporaries, particularly in the Midwest, their biggest question is like, where's the data that's showing the impact? And I think what you've seen is that there's been adoption heavy on the coast, but for us in the Midwest, I mean, we're building the largest passive house development in Chicago's history. It breaks ground in the next 60 days. We're building the largest, the second largest, and the third largest all in 2 years, because no one else has done this to scale. And so there's no data out there because there's, as you guys know, in the development world, market matters. You know, some neighborhoods are not union, some are union. There's better depth of contractors. Some communities are more competitive than others. And so construction data matters, right? And so what we're doing is we're going to open source all of our deals. And so all of our sworn statements will be made public. So you will know everything I spent on insulation and HVAC and all of that. And so you can draw your own conclusions and kind of a la carte make decisions about sustainability measures that you can find applicable to other developments and so forth. The second thing, and I'll build on David's point, is organizing the incentive packages and how applicable they are to your particular development, whether they be local, state, federal incentive packages. I know there's a lot of talk about 45L. And then obviously all the state ones, is how is that applicable? And that's one of the biggest questions I get is how the heck do we stack these? And, you know, can I pick one or two and see if that works? And maybe the next development, I embrace a larger portfolio or suite of decision-making. And so those are the biggest headwinds that we see of trying to bring other folks to our way of thinking. And, you know, we're just going to try to blaze this trail and say, you know what, we're going to go things that we do well and or not well, we're going to be transparent about it, and hopefully folks can build upon it.
Great, thanks. Krista, I'm curious, how has Enterprise Green Communities been adapting to kind of some of the challenges we're seeing in terms of retrofitting existing buildings?
Yeah, I'll dive into that. But before I dive into some of the specifics about how Green Communities is adapting to retrofitting existing buildings, just wanted to mention that through Enterprise's national climate approach, which we call Building Resilient Futures, we'll be starting this fall in partnership with Rewiring America to expand their incentive API, which is currently focused primarily on single family, to include all incentives relevant for multifamily housing across the country as well. It'll take a little while to put together, but I know that to AJ's point, like knowing what you're eligible for and how to draw a path through the compliance requirements through those is really important, because with increased compliance requirements for building performance, there needs to be increased funding in the capital stacks often for the affordable housing deals. So we're looking at trying to make that easier for folks. So that's one thing that's on the horizon. But we're also doing a lot within our Green Communities platform. For folks on the phone who aren't familiar with Green Communities, it's a green building platform for affordable housing that's been around for about 20 years. There's a criteria and a certification program. It's been used across the country in nearly every state. And while it's always had explicit pathways for moderate rehabs, substantial rehabs, and new construction, we've been releasing updates this summer to provide and add explicit guidance within Green Communities for how affordable housing teams can reach the highest performance goals with retrofits of existing buildings. So for instance, we've created a path for existing buildings to reach our highest level of certification, which we call Certification Plus, in a manner that does not include the same prescriptive design details required of new construction projects, as prescriptive approaches are so challenging in existing buildings. So we've done that. We've also aligned the Green Communities program with the new federal definition of zero emissions buildings. This is a new thing for a lot of people to differentiate between zero energy and zero emissions. So we've built that in to Green Communities now. And later this fall, we'll have templates and guidelines for affordable housing development teams who are working on retrofits of existing buildings to use zero over time plans for their properties, so that they'll be able to show alignment with the federal definition and qualify for new federal funding streams like the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. You know, zero over time just reflects that it's not often feasible to ask a retrofit of an existing building to reach zero all in one fell swoop. Instead, you can make a lot of progress there at a retrofit at a point in time, but you need to take advantage of other points throughout the life cycle of the building to actually reach zero. So we'll be creating guidelines that folks can pick up and use, like open source, to do that. So all in all, we're taking a longer time perspective for existing buildings, looking at a retrofit in the context of a building's useful life or tax credit cycle, and shepherding the work in the property to move towards zero emissions performance in practical ways that match inflection points of the capital cycle. So if you're a person who refreshes the Green Communities website on a daily or weekly basis, you will have seen changes this summer reflecting that, and we'll have more to come this summer as well.
That's great. Thank you. This is some exciting resources, especially the Rewiring America calculator is going to be a game changer. So thank you. I wanted to kind of move on to talk about some of the solutions to some of these challenges. Recognizing that housing providers are the key decision makers about whether to invest in sustainability. Have you seen examples of solutions to address some of these challenges? How can we make this work more accessible to housing providers? And what role does the Inflation Reduction Act have in kind of scaling up some of these potential solutions? Abby, can I start with you? What solutions do you see as most promising, and how can the IRA be leveraged to scale them up?
Yeah, And honestly, I was kind of reflecting on the prior question because as a funder and investor, I think the things we are looking for is to be the first movers on stuff. And I think the program, for example, that we supported NHT on, is so important to see follow-on investments and like be able to seed because in the end, it's going to sort of take a public-private sort of all hands on deck effort to tackle this issue. And it is important for us to think about interventions that are making the housing system more efficient, but also more equitable. So I just wanted to reflect on that lens. And so many of our partners are thinking about those solutions, whether it's how do you think about electrification, decarbonization, from NHT's perspective, but also a lot of them are talking about smarter supply and how do you build supply that sort of already brings in a sustainability and climate resilient lens. We have a partner working in the Rio Grande Valley that's working on single family stock that is climate efficient, is also disaster relief with that in mind. Sorry, not the environmental resistant, especially when you're thinking about the coast. I do want to take a little bit of a step back and think about this. For me, the question is around equity and scale. In the past couple of years, 3 monumental pieces of legislation were signed into law. So we have the 550 billion Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, obviously the IRA Act, a 200 billion CHIPS Act. Many are calling this, once in a generation funding. But I think everybody in this room knows that funding alone does not guarantee the maximized impact for communities and underserved communities. And the equity in the funding piece is not always guaranteed. And so what we are also thinking is how do we play a role to support our partners that are working on unlocking that funding and those financial resources to make sure that at the end of the day, they were equitably distributed and that the communities that we care about have the benefit of that investment. And obviously for us, we're trying to think about that. How do you balance the equity piece, the scalability piece, the commercial viability of some of those products? You guys know better than me, but I know for housing, it's going to take a little bit for us to work those kinks out, especially with IRA. But obviously, I am very hopeful because I'm in a virtual room of experts that are trying to figure that out and that are informing the field.
So we did get a question in the chat, Abby. Continuing to talk about some of the financing solutions. Someone's asked for more information about the grant loan programs that you mentioned before.
Sure, I can drop in sort of some of the headlines. And then obviously I think Danielle shared my contact information. So I'm also happy to take requests on that, but happy to do that.
Thank you. Anybody else want to jump in, sort of what you see as some of the promising solutions? What role can IRA play in sort of scaling up some of the solutions?
I could do a 45-minute no notes talk about the IRA. I mean, that's an easy one for me. I will just say that inside the IRA, I'll just give an example. We're putting solar on affordable housing here in Illinois and Greater Chicago. Without any additional application, you can start at a 50% investment tax credit. I mean, that is unprecedented. And by the time you layer our state incentives, you're at a 100% capital stack. I mean, depending on the community, you may be at 90 at worst. And so like that is unheard of in terms of subsidizing access to clean energy. I think it's going to take time, obviously, for the adoption of and the consistent access and the understanding of administering these resources. But, I know we'll talk about the future, but you're talking about unprecedented access to these resources when you're starting at a federal tax credit at 50%. Even if you sell those at 88 cents or 85 cents on the dollar, that's real access to capital. once we figure out how those are monetized, and the fact that you can do a direct sell of those, so you don't need a tax flip. Not to go full finance nerd this afternoon, but the ability to direct transfer those allows us to just sell those one time versus do these very complicated tax equity flips, which create another administrative hurdle. Those, whoever, the folks that thought of that were really intentional, and that will be a game changer that will impact generations to come in terms of access. So I can't say enough good things about the Inflation Reduction Act.
Thanks, AJ. Anybody else, Dave, maybe from your perspective, since DOE is getting some IRA funding, how are you thinking about ways to deploy that kind of addresses some of the challenges that you mentioned before?
Yes, absolutely. And I'll speak about the IRA from the rebates side of things. More specifically, that's where a lot of my time has been. But fortunately, we're able to use the rebates, or we're working with our application to be able to use the rebates to plug them into some existing programs. I think so that's the accelerator and our affordable home electrification program that both address multifamily, then single family, smaller residential, respectively. In plussing those up, we're going to use that to fund as close to, or hopefully at 100% of retrofits, and specifically kind of deep energy electrification retrofits that push these buildings into this realm of, decade plus sort of compliance, and like really at the same time improving the health of residents and all the different quality of life changes. So we're trying to weave those things in together. It's I will say it's quite complicated, everything that's going on. We're trying to take the complication, internalize it, and just give something back out that is simple for folks to use. But so we're working in that. We're also like figuring out how to weave that into the way that we fund affordable housing in the district. And so it's in like the qualified allocation plan, like building in how that's structured for threshold requirements and competitive points and those sort of things, so that what we're pushing towards with the incentive funding from IRA, but also local dollars, is also like moving people down that path as well. And then also aligning the regulations and processes. And as I mentioned earlier, kind of trying to remove friction that any building owner might face within the system, because it's already plenty complicated to get it done. So we're trying not to add to that and really bring a lot of value. Yeah, let's stop there.
Thanks, Dave.
Stop.
Any other comments on kind of solutions that folks see as promising before we move on to the next question?
I'll just add one thing, and maybe it's stating the obvious a little bit, but I think the additional resources that IRA is providing is allowing a little bit of space for affordable housers to dream a little bit bigger. Like there haven't been sources, let's see, tied to compliance goals that prioritize reducing emissions, deepening energy efficiency, adding renewables, thinking about what your grid is made up of. There haven't been those goals tied to sources that can help you pay for it. So the IRA is, and even the other federal programs, like it's not enough money, as we've all said, to like fully decarbonize the entire housing stock, but it is enough to provide some space to experiment, prioritize, get early projects to prove workable solutions out there that then others can follow, hopefully at less cost than the earliest adapters will be, expending. So I think if we take a really big picture view of time, like if we have IRA funding for the next 7 years or so, that's at least how long the greenhouse gas reduction fund is plugged to be. How can we use this period of time to really get the best lessons learned under our belts to establish just new standard ways of approaching affordable housing development in the future? So I think that's a really valuable kind of bigger picture like impact that the funding's having.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't want to lose sight of sort of the goal of this work, which is to benefit residents of these buildings. And so I want to talk a little bit about, what the role is of residents in this process and how they can best be positioned to really benefit from sustainability investments. Krista, can you talk a little bit about enterprise green communities and sort of the focus on residents in that program?
Yeah, for sure. I think a perspective that we're trying to embody within green communities and with our other Building Resilient Futures programs is how can folks who are involved in affordable housing decision making, whether that's on the finance or design or operations or construction side, like how can you leverage your expertise to solve for community needs? At the same time, you're doing your job, right? So within the Green Communities certification platform, when we launched our 2020 criteria, we included a new tool that's called the Project Priorities Survey, and that's mandatory for every property seeking certification. It's like a one-stop tool to reflect and bring together lots of different competing interests, looking at health goals of the property, energy, climate risk, but centering that in community experience and perspective. So there are questions in there that ask what assets and challenges is the property situated in according to the impacted community? Like what feedback from the community that's impacted by the property can center design and scope decisions? So like with this approach of trying to bring it all together at the front with community input, where through the green communities criteria process and certification, we're like institutionalizing a step in affordable housing development for folks of the community impacted by your property to have agency and lifting up aspects of the design or retrofit that are most meaningful to them. So that's one way that we're approaching that through green communities. And then kind of partnered to that, if you will, in the work that we're doing as part of designing power forward communities with the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. We're centering resident impact in our investment decision protocols. So we've developed an impact rating tool to screen deals that includes community impact, and we'll be scoping each project that's designed to reduce greenhouse gas emissions with an energy justice approach to look to ensure that operating expenses don't negatively impact residents. So that may look like realizing that we need to deepen investments in energy efficiency or add community solar to certain deals alongside electrification. But at the end of the day, it should be a scope of work that improves resident quality of life in a way that is, if at all possible, defined by the community that's being impacted. So thorny issues, but I think centering that process is what leads to better solutions.
Thank you. AJ, I know that you do a lot of work in communities and I think some workforce development support. I'm curious sort of how you, what does some of that work look like and how do you engage the communities that you work with to make sure that they benefit from this work?
Yeah, absolutely. So as I mentioned that I'm passionate about lowering people's utility bills and their quality of life. What I have found in the midst of investing and doing these developments is that equally as important is who gets these jobs. And I've always been a bit frustrated with many of the contemporaries in the sustainable and environmental activist world, where if I say who should be our architect or our engineer, they all say the same names, and yet no one has the wherewithal to go, shouldn't we name 10 more people? Shouldn't we bring more people to this conversation? The same engineering firm, the same HVAC company, the same solar company gets all of this work, and we never challenge that status quo. And so I change, all of our deals. I don't use any of the engineers that are historically the folks that get this work. If you've never done a passive house deal, that's fine by me. We'll teach you in the process. And then downstream in terms of labor, it's the exact same thing. Who should be installing the solar? I mean, because we're only exacerbating those same differences, right? Solar was a luxury item 5 years ago. Now it's a luxury job, right? Why can't folks in the inner cities have those jobs? Why do those all have to be downstate? when we're installing out in logistical hubs. Those jobs need to stay here as well, or else you're continuing this motto that these are for the others, right? Instead of everyone. And so we created a workforce program that when I go to invest in a neighborhood, the folks in that neighborhood get first dibs on the job. And once again, it sounded relatively exotic, but it's relatively basic. The folks in those communities should participate in the ascension of their own communities. And so we started the program. We created a clean energy hub. We're incentivizing folks to start small businesses. I'm the developer owner, so I got this little thing called leverage. And so I tell the contractors, you don't get my money unless you hire from these communities. It's funny how they find creative ways to go hire folks. And so, we're passionate about sustainability, but access matters too. You cannot parachute people into communities and say, we're going to spend all this greenhouse gas money, billions of legendary dollars in communities that have historically never gotten it. But we're going to parachute in folks from the community to get the access to that money. And they're going to be the folks that benefit from it. But it's backwards. And so we created the program. We've expanded it. We received another grant a couple of weeks ago to expand the program regionally. And we're going to continue to kind of press against this, this kind of small club of folks that get to say they're a part of this environmental and sustainable renaissance. It should be all of us that stand there if we're really going to say we're trying to benefit all communities. It shouldn't just be from access. It should be economics as well, so that we can truly change the trajectory of those neighborhoods.
Yeah, absolutely.
Todd, if I can, if you don't mind me jumping in, there's
Sure,
just two
sure.
things that both the panelists' reflections brought up to mind. For me, as an investor and funder, the thing I can do is to center resident voices and communities when I am thinking about who our partners are. And I think that is something that we've been trying to do since we made the 400 million commitment, being very thoughtful about asking those questions. And I'm very proud to see our partners, a lot of that resident-centered approaches are embedded because it was by design that we were looking for those organizations that are trying to work in that intersection. So for me, that's one thing that I always keep in mind as a funder and investor. And then to Edge's point, I'm really excited because this historic investment is allowing us to bring multi-cross-sector partnerships that are national, that are local. I lead the neighborhood development team that focuses mostly on housing, but through the IRA work, I'm excited to partner with my jobs and skills counterpart that is thinking about jobs. I'm excited to partner with our small business team that's thinking about small business growth, because I do think that this historic funding gives us an opportunity to think outside a little bit our silos in terms of housing, sustainability, jobs, small business, because it all comes together. And exciting ways for us to support that is something that I'm really looking forward to seeing as we continue to implement this work.
Absolutely. Dave, can I ask you, I know that community engagement is important from DOE's perspective in terms of policy making. So how does community engagement really inform the work that you all do?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have taken steps to engage the community around policy, particularly electrification and decarbonization, including an equitable building electrification grant with NHT. I will say we've learned a lot, and I will say there's more to do, a lot more we can do. There's never, I don't think, an endpoint to really centering the voice of the community and understanding all the complexities and desires and of what the community needs. And within that, I think there's a lot of common narratives that exist out there about what a community wants, or a lot of assumptions. And within these learning and listening sessions, we've found that and maybe not surprisingly to folks in this call, it's quite a bit more nuanced and complex, and I think it's much more real about how people feel about these things. For and then for me, for example, like even just like something around like gas cooktops, I think everyone's like feel like you're on one side or the other is how it's presented, but it's really actually quite more complicated and nuanced. Folks want they want cooktops that they understand and they can fix. Like a lot of the folks we talk to have abilities to like work on their cooktops and like fix them and know how they work and function. And there's a cultural aspect to how you cook, obviously, very clearly. But there's also, and there's also not, but there's also, there's safety concerns for kids and fire risk. And this is all these different layers. And so it's like the idea of like where you stand on electrification is not one side or the other, even though it's presented as it's like the super divisive thing. And folks really just want good equipment that works well, it's functional, it's efficient, it's and cost effective to maintain, and something that they can rely on and keep their families safe. So it's things like that, and then that turns around and influences the policies that we put together and how we approach residents, communities, and building owners, and how we incentivize these different measures. We've also learned a lot about just the need for, and this is something I think we've all known for a while, resident education around equipment, so that the benefit of the equipment can be captured, and that the resident of the community is empowered to be able to use that equipment in the way that it was intended. And also when it breaks down or has issues, that there's a way to go about fixing that, and people know on how to do that. So like there's these kind of important steps along the way. And that definitely influences how we put together our programs and how we think about that approach to the work that we do.
Thank you. We are getting some audience questions. We have one that came in, and Dave, I might throw this one to you. Are there any funding sources to address antiquated wiring to allow low income and renters to weatherize and insulate? I'm wondering if, I believe the rebates do include some funding for like enabling upgrades. Is that right?
Yes, yeah. The depending on the program that we're talking about, there's funding that's available to address electrical system upgrades and electrical system heavy ups, and it depends on where you're at. I mean, I don't know, in this question you mentioned weatherize, and I don't know if this is specific to the weatherization program, but oftentimes you can, it can be quite complicated how you have to weave together all these different funding sources. Like they only go so far. And this is one of the things that we're running up against and trying to put these programs together, is that every federal program has like very specific requirements, and something is seemingly should be as simple as like income verification could be vastly complicated, and how money can get used or not used. So, but yeah, the IRA does have a lot more, and the rebates program, for instance, have a lot more latitude to be able to use that funding to do the different type of work that you need. But they're also very insistent that they won't use it for like, you can't use that money to like fix a roof because of safety concerns, only if it deals with efficiency. So it gets quite complicated, but
yeah,
it's a great point. Yeah.
So I know we're coming up against time. I kind of want to just ask you all one last question, hopefully hear from each of you. So I'd like you to think ahead to 2030. And sort of share what trends do you hope to see between now and then related to advancing healthier, climate friendly, affordable housing? Who wants to start?
Can jump in. For me, I think about how to embed this as part of business as usual, BAU, as we say in short. Like, how do we make sure that the strategies that are advancing sustainability, climate resilience, that center health and the health impacts are sort of normal course of business for housing providers in particular? How do we figure out the financing of it, the incentives of it, I always say, like, every time we work on a deal, it's like super innovative, it's great, look, we layer all this financing, and it's like, can we do it again? And can we replicate without breaking our brains or layering all this financial? So in an ideal world, we wouldn't have such a complicated capital stack. Incentives could get aligned. And for me in particular, I think JP Morgan Chase is really interested in how do we bring that cohesiveness, how do we encourage that as like funders, investors, but also using our voice. Part of the team I lead is as the policy center, where we're advocating for policies that just make sense and build a more inclusive economy, which housing is a core part of that work. And then I really do hope that we can look at this incredible investments that I've mentioned and say, wow, we really did center community. Communities did benefit not as end users, but to Aja's point, also on the economic benefit in terms of jobs. And again, that we won't look at sort of this investment to say, we missed the mark because we went too fast, or we didn't center community voice. So I'm hopeful that we're ready to do that this time.
Anyone else want to share their vision for 2030?
I mean, I'll sign on to Abby's. That's fantastic. You know, 2030 isn't that far away, especially if we're thinking about it in the context of affordable housing, like development cycles. You know, that's barely enough time to finance and build a property. So, but I think that we have been maybe for the past year, 2, 3 years, like in the midst of this like impressive inflection point about what we're requiring of and what we're able to provide, like through housing decisions. I guess if one thing that I'm excited about seeing more of in the next 6 or 7 years is more of a life cycle approach being taken within development decisions in terms of looking at building materials, thinking about emissions reduction, thinking about climate risk reduction, not just at a point in time of a particular transaction, but how then am I thinking about my zero over time approach, you know, or how am I thinking today about what the temperatures will be 30 years from now when a family's living in my building and needs to be cool in the summer. So taking more of this life cycle approach as a status quo rather than a best in class kind of perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. Any quick thoughts from you, Dave or AJ? We have 1 minute left, so have to be pretty quick.
AJ, you want to go first?
I will just, I think 2030, I just hope that investors and policymakers are posing questions like, who's your partner? Who's the minority or women-owned business that's a part of this, that represents the community's interest in this? And I think continuously posing that question, I think will change a lot of dynamics.
I'll say yes to everything everyone said. I'll sign on. And then from a technology perspective, I'm really excited about the emerging electrification technologies. A lot of like these 120-volt plug-in appliances and equipment that could make basically a more cost-effective but less invasive process for getting this type of equipment and doing fuel switching and electrification within residence units and stuff. That I think that has a lot of promise to make this happen fast and on scale.
Thanks. Well, I think we could go on with this conversation, but unfortunately we're out of time. But I just wanted to really thank you all for participating for this really rich conversation. You know, I certainly learned a lot. So thank you so much. And thank you to all of the participants for joining us. As we mentioned earlier, we'll be posting this webinar and info about our next edition of the webinar series soon on our website, along with some supplemental materials regarding today's topic. With that, thank you all for participating and for joining. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Todd. Hmm.